What we have here is a collection of our graphic novels and graphic narratives in the Emory Libraries, a large collection that exists both at the Woodruff and Oxford libraries. It includes a large number of foreign language materials in addition to English language in multiple formats, both electronic and print, and which have been used very frequently in courses and classes, and it is a growing area of collection building within those libraries. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about how these kind of graphic novels have become a really important literary medium for the expression of alternative discourses, alternative opinions, retellings of history, and so forth. Most of these graphic novels that you'll see here came out of the comics. And then comics really became pretty important as what we might call proto-graphic narratives or proto-graphic novels back in the late 1800s. Many of us are familiar with cartoons and comic strips and so forth, right? Things like Little Nemo in Slumberland, the Katzenjammer Kids, things of that sort. It wasn't really until the 1950s that folks really began to be kind of worried about cartoons. And what I mean by that is there was actually a really important study that came out of the 1950s that was the seduction of the innocents that came out. I was concerned that comics were a lower level of reading and a lower level of literacy. But as most individuals who study comics and graphic novels and graphic narratives will tell you, graphic novels are amazing in terms of visual literacy, but also demand so much more from the reader. And as you can tell from some of these examples that we have here, they allow for so much more room for interpretation and for artistic expression. So you'll see, for example, in the case that we have here, this one written by an individual whose brother suffered from epilepsy. It was a very interesting take on how to express images of seizures and images of convulsions and so forth. And it involves many panels, it involves words, it involves blocking. There's a lot more to take into every single page. Now, how do some of these things come about? What are some prototypes of graphic narrative as we consider them today? Things that most people are familiar with, such as the Watchmen, for example, the Marvel comics, things of that sort. A lot of them came out in the 1930s for things such as wordless novels. An example is right over here from Otto Nuckel, made of woodcuts, wordless, that influenced several others. They tell a story through images. Now, more contemporary graphic novels do a combination of images and prose, and it's more demanding sometimes on the reader, and many will argue that it's actually more complex in terms of the visual literacy instead of just prose literacy, and that they're essential. We have several faculty here at Emory who teach courses in this area and really emphasize the importance of these in terms of being a really visual literate citizen. One of the things I emphasize in graphic novels is the term. Oftentimes graphic novels are seen as more literary than comics. Some might call it the gentrification, in a sense, of those, and that's not really the case. Particularly what we like to consider graphic narratives as long-form comics with a more complex narrative associated with them. So it's not a question of the quality or the highbrowness. In fact, some of the most famous graphic novels that some people are familiar with, such as Persepolis from Marjane Satrapi, which is about an Iranian family's experience during the Iranian Revolution. Some of those individuals don't like to call their things graphic novels because in some way they feel like it's a little more bourgeois. So we don't like to show that graphic novels in terms of their quality. It's more about what they're trying to express. Another thing we like to emphasize about graphic novels and our graphic narratives at Emory is what kind of topics are covered. These are really important mediums for the expression of views and perspectives that have been forgotten, marginalized by other types of histories. So for example, this one right here is called 7 Miles a Second, the story of the author's last few years with HIV. And it was actually an interesting case because he wrote the text while he had some other folks put together the images and so forth. And it's immensely powerful, colorful expression of New York during that time. We have other cases such as this one down here, which is a book about Maximus Ohanzi Wildhorse, who was rebaptized as Max Wild. He was an African-American, Native American actor discovered by Cary Grant and was in many, many films playing the stereotypical ethnic role. And until this day, until this actually book came out, I would bet that most folks did not know who he was at all. And these two French authors really did some deep research and a retelling of the period of time in Hollywood in the 1930s, which was one of the golden eras, and the role that he played. So this is a role of a figure, a non-white figure, who pretty much whose contributions are forgotten, but were made more realized in action of graphic novel form. It makes it very alive, as if you were actually at that time seeing him in the movies and how he was discovered, and then how he was then actually forgotten. And as a side note, he was forgotten because he actually went to the Soviet Union for a film and was actually red listed at that time. So all his contributions to films were destroyed. But he became really important for others coming in, Asian Americans in particular, or African Americans or Native Americans who were playing in Hollywood. We have other examples. This is an example right here, Citizen 13660, which was from the Japanese internment camps, the experience of Mine Okubo, who was an artist who not only used prose but added her images to the expression as well about the experience of her Japanese compatriots during that horrible part of American history. It's an ability to revisit historical events under the eyes and views and the guise of others, as opposed to what we have considered or taken down as the popular version of events. With the growth of graphic novels, particularly after the 1960s and early 1970s, the marketplace for graphic narratives has really exploded, particularly in Western Europe, but also in Japan, the United States, and Latin America, with more major publishing houses and more independent publishers investing in these type of narratives. Huge festivals now are being held across the world and being written about, used in literary circles. All that is not to take away from them being long-form comics, even though they may seem a little bit highbrow. If you're reading Watchmen as a graphic novel, it is pretty darn complex and talking about pretty deep issues. And so it does not need to be quote-unquote literary just because it's called a graphic novel. And we always like to emphasize that comics in of themselves are extremely important for building visual literacy, but they are being now revisited as really important for that. And there's a great TED Talk actually from a professor who tries to include it now in K through 12 classes to say how important it is. And now it's no longer lowbrow reading. It is, essential reading. This is a new growing area for libraries, and we continue to look for new ideas and new ways to display and to market these collections.